So good evening, everyone, and I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us for this public meeting to highlight Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan. I know it's hard to take time out of your evening, so I really do appreciate that you're here. I am Bernadette Graham Hudson, and I'm the Wildlife Division Administrator at the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. This effort that we've been working on has really been a team effort across the divisions within ODFW. So I want to start by having some of the other team members who are here tonight introduce themselves, and once we get through those introductions, then I'll give a few kind of opening remarks about the importance of our State Wildlife Action Plan. So with that, Carolyn, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Hi, everyone. I'm Carolyn Eckrich, and I am our State Wildlife Action Plan Revision Coordinator at ODFW. And I will throw it to Emily.
Thank you. I'm Emily Van Wyk. I'm our Wildlife Diversity Program Coordinator at headquarters for ODFW. Jessica, you want to take it away?
Yeah, hi everyone. Jessica Watson here, and I am the Marine Resource Program Policy Project Lead, but I've been on a 6-month rotation as the Habitat Division Administrator, so kind of wearing a little bit of two hats here of Habitat Division as well as Marine Resource Program. And I'll kick it over to Justin.
Thanks, and good evening. Justin Ainsworth. I'm the manager of the Marine Resources Program, which is part of Fish Division. And I will turn it to Michelle.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michelle Weaver, and I'm representing the inland portion of Fish in Fish Division. I work as a fish conservation biologist in our conservation and recovery program.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. And I know we have some other staff online as well, but we'll go ahead and jump in here. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes kind of framing up why the State Wildlife Action Plan is important to us. And then I will turn it over to some of the other team members to get more into the details for this evening's presentation. So starting out, some of you may be pretty familiar with ODFW, while others may not be. So I want folks to understand that our mission includes protecting and enhancing Oregon's fish and wildlife and their habitats for both use and enjoyment for the present and future generations. And that future generations is really important because we need to focus on our conservation actions now in order to make sure that these species and their habitats persist into the future. I also want to point out that this mission includes all of Oregon's fish, wildlife, and habitats, and is not just limited to certain species. So we're really trying to cast a broad net here and guide our conservation actions. The State Wildlife Action Plan, which you will probably hear referred to as the SWAP many times during our presentation tonight, it's a guiding document for our conservation efforts. It's a high priority for the department to be implementing this plan, and it also guides and coordinates our actions to help species at risk in Oregon. But this plan is not just for ODFW. More importantly, it's a tool to help our partners and those that are interested in conservation around the state focus their efforts on the species, habitats, and actions that will have the most benefit. So our hope is that the SWAP serves as a tool to help guide conservation actions by our partners. And our partners could include federal agencies, state agencies, local governments, conservation groups, and can go all the way down to local communities and individuals as well. We want to focus our work in the most important areas with the most likely chance for success. And the SWAP is our tool to do that. As I mentioned before, it's not just about wildlife. It includes fish, habitats, marine species, invertebrates, and plants as well. And it's really a great resource to help guide all of our work. So we've had a State Wildlife Action Plan for 20 years now. It was originally known as the Oregon Conservation Strategy. And we're currently in the process of revising the plan. And one area we're trying to focus on is to gain momentum in plan implementation. So this is especially important for us as we see declines in many species in Oregon. We want to continue the work that we've been doing for the last 20 years, but also expand to new partners, gain more public support, and increase the capacity to implement these conservation actions. So we're excited to share what we've been working on. That includes what the SWAP encompasses and how it's been put into action, but also about our revision efforts and our efforts to focus our work going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Carolyn, our State Wildlife Action Plan Revision Coordinator, and she can launch into the presentation.
Thanks, Bernadette. And again, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us during this especially hot evening. We really appreciate your time. And again, my name is Carolyn Eckridge, and I am the State Wildlife Action Plan Revision Coordinator at ODFW. Today, we're here to talk about Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan and the 10-year revision of that plan. So I just wanted to set the stage a little bit with a brief overview of the status of biodiversity on a global scale. You can see here in this figure that this is showing losses across the globe, and then talk about how that relates to biodiversity in Oregon. At this moment, species are going extinct faster than any time in human history. Unfortunately, a recent report by NatureServe ranked Oregon as the 5th highest state in percent of at-risk animals in the US. Species at risk include over half of our 32 amphibian species, which is worse than the global trend that you see here on the slide, approximately 10% of our bird species, and nearly 20% of our reptile species. In the face of alarming loss and daunting conservation challenges, we need a tool to inform how to effectively and efficiently use our limited resources to make the best conservation decisions. The Oregon State Wildlife Action Plan is our mechanism to provide the information needed to guide and prioritize this work. The goals of the SWAP are to maintain healthy fish and wildlife populations by maintaining and restoring functioning habitats, preventing declines of at-risk species, and reversing declines in these resources where possible. The SWAP emphasizes proactively conserving declining species and habitats to reduce the possibility of future federal or state listings. It is not a regulatory document, but instead presents issues, opportunities, and recommended voluntary actions that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of conservation in Oregon. The SWAP is a broad plan for all Oregonians, offering potential roles and opportunities for citizens, private landowners, organizations, and agencies alike. The SWAP can be used to direct funding opportunities through grant programs, focus conservation actions by multiple entities across the state, provide information on the status of our species and habitats and threats, and improve coordination by helping partners find each other to do this important work, all of which in turn leads to more efficient and effective conservation efforts. It can be really hard to know what you can do as an individual Oregonian or as part of the conservation community at large. That's why we offer lots of opportunities to use the SWAP to plan, focus research, provide guidance, and to help prioritize conservation actions. Throughout the SWAP, you will find resources to prioritize and guide conservation. If you click through our chapters and sections, you will see recommendations and priorities everywhere. For example, each key conservation issue, or KCI, identifies goals and actions to address those threats to species and habitats. And each species profile identifies conservation actions that benefit the species and areas where information is needed to guide survey efforts. Compass is our online data mapping and planning tool. Compass is integrated with the SWAP website and is a great way to view spatial representations of SWAP components. It also offers a tool which allows users to designate a planning area and generate a report that identifies all of the species and habitats documented or modeled within it. We have a top 5 wildlife species by ecoregion list that reflects ODFW's wildlife priorities and may be useful for any external organization with similar wildlife priorities or those looking to partner with ODFW. Our conservation opportunity areas, or COAs, identify areas where broad fish and wildlife conservation goals would best be met and help to prioritize on-the-ground conservation actions statewide. COA profiles identify recommended conservation actions to utilize when planning projects in these areas, and they also suggest potential partners to encourage collaboration. And we have priority wildlife connectivity areas, or PWCAs, which are an interconnected network that represent parts of the landscape with the highest overall value for facilitating wildlife movement in Oregon. They can be used to identify priorities for restoration, mitigation, and protection. These are just a few examples of how the swap works to provide ways in which citizens, private landowners, organizations, and agencies alike can find a potential role in the swap. So the existing plan, as Barnett mentioned, has been, we've had a swap for 20 years. The existing plan has been in effect for 10 years, and it's a valuable and foundational document that guides conservation in Oregon. But there are several reasons why we are taking the opportunity to revise our swap. First, we want to incorporate new science, data, tools, and resources. A lot has changed in the past 10 years. We've also learned a lot, both about conservation of fish and wildlife resources and their habitats, but also how to do that better. We want to make sure that the tools we provide are usable for our partners and the public so that we can be effective at implementation of conservation actions. These tools and resources also enhance our ability to communicate conservation goals across the state, so it is imperative that they remain relevant. And lastly, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service requires each U.S. state and territory that receives state wildlife grants to have a state wildlife action plan. And these grants are a major funding source for conservation in Oregon. Now I want to spend some time walking through the entire timeline of the revision to review some of the key elements of the process. The red, orange, yellow section of the timeline represents 2023 and 2024 and outlines what we have done since the revision process began. We completed an extensive internal review of existing content and began our outreach with a series of presentations to partner groups and outreach events. In April of 2024, we sent out an external partner and public survey to get initial thoughts on the existing swap and areas to focus our revisions on. For the last half of 2024, our staff worked hard to update the swap, incorporating the feedback that we received to produce the first drafts of updated sections. And now for what we have been working on most recently in 2025 in green. In early January, we held our community engagement kickoff meeting with partners and the public. In February, we began a series of partner technical review work group sessions. These were topic-specific meetings that focused on discussing and reviewing specific sections of the swap. We held 14 meetings between February and May, recordings of which are available on our revision website. Also in the spring, we ramped up our non-technical focused outreach and education, utilizing a variety of formats to reach new audiences. Some examples of this outreach include radio ads, upcoming spots on KGW, the Oregon is Worth Protecting campaign and website, and we currently have a limited edition cup available at Jamba Juice, which is really cool, and you should check it out if you have a chance. Our staff worked to incorporate the feedback we received through this engagement process to complete a final draft of the swap at the beginning of July. This allows us to submit the final draft to the ODFW Commission for review and approval at the August Commission meeting. And finally, the swap is due to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on October 1st, 2025. Following submission, the service will develop a technical review team that will approve the revision in 2026. Broad partner and public participation is an essential element of developing and implementing the swap. We've really focused on outreach throughout this process. One of our goals with our outreach has been to raise the general awareness of Oregon swap as the key mechanism by which we understand the species at risk and how to protect them. We want to offer tools and resources that will enable people to take advantage of existing opportunities to act. To do that, we need to make sure that these tools are accessible and prioritize our plan speaking to the needs of our conservation partners and communities. Another of our objectives is to connect with audiences we do not typically address. We want the plan to welcome and inspire all of those who want to roll up their sleeves and do conservation work with us. We also want to emphasize that outreach will remain ongoing as we continue to build these important relationships. By participating in the meeting today, we hope that we inspire you to utilize the swap and to see how it speaks to your needs. This plan can only be successful through cooperative actions and implementation. And now Emily Van Wyk will talk more about some of the key updates we made during the revision.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolyn. So Carolyn laid the groundwork well of where we came from with the State Wildlife Action Plan, the revision process, and what our goals are. I'm going to pick up here with more of the details about what we've accomplished in the last few years to help guide you as you take a critical look at our latest draft. So in this iteration of the swap, there are a number of updates that are particularly impactful to the content. And I want to start here with these broad themes and then go into the specifics for each of our focal areas. So one key change throughout is the name change, as Bernadette flagged right up front. So we've changed the name to the State Wildlife Action Plan. And this reflects the total integration of what was previously referred to as the Oregon Nearshore Strategy, which focused only on marine issues, and the Oregon Conservation Strategies. And the intent here is to allow us to elevate issues in the nearshore and make information across all of Oregon's ecoregions, from the nearshore all the way to the Blue Mountains, more readily accessible to users. We're also changing several of the foundational terms that we previously used during this revision to get us in line with national terminology. And so that includes changing the name of our strategy species, now our SGCN, our species of greatest conservation need, and our strategy habitats to key habitats. And while that might be a little bit challenging for us in Oregon in the near term, long term, that's going to be really beneficial to help us communicate more succinctly with partners, be clear with what our intent is, especially when we're thinking about partners that cross state boundaries and are using different swaps in different states. The next few items we'll describe in greater depth in slides following, but really showcase the breadth of the types of updates made to the swap. So first off, we've added pollution as a brand new KCI. While this was mentioned previously in the first and second iterations of the swap, we didn't really provide information in one centralized location. We also completely restructured the conservation toolbox to enhance usability and added sections showcasing the types of actions individuals can take. We also comprehensively reviewed our COAs to make sure that they included up-to-date information and were consistent between different COAs and how they treated certain land classifications. We conducted a comprehensive review and revision of all of our species lists, and we're elevating beaver and beaver modified habitat to better present information on how they relate to conservation of our most imperiled species. Next slide, please. So with that broad context, let's look a little bit more closely at updates in each of the focal areas of the swap, starting with species. For many individuals, species are really the gateway that brings them into the State Wildlife Action Plan. We have a lot of charismatic species in Oregon, and people are oftentimes curious to learn more about species of conservation concern in their state, specific threats, or what they can do to help. And also, in many ways, the species are the cornerstone of our swap, as this plan and other plans like it across the U.S. are really intended to serve as the blueprints for proactive conservation of fish and wildlife, to prevent species from declining further or becoming endangered or even extinct. We have 3 broad categories of species included in the revised swap. We've covered these really extensively in previous presentations, so I'll keep it high level. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit our YouTube channel for all of our public-facing meetings. So our species of greatest conservation need, or our SGCNs, are the species that we've identified as having imperiled conservation status. At a high level, these are those species identified that met 2 or more conservation criteria intended to identify species that are most at risk in Oregon, and for which timely implementation of conservation measures to address existing or potential threats is really needed to prevent them from declining to the point of qualifying as threatened or endangered. The next group is our species of greatest information need, or our SGIN. And these are species for which we just don't know enough about them to determine their status. So there's a reason that we might be concerned, but we're really not able to evaluate those successfully. In addition to our SGCN and our SGIN, there are a number of ways that we're including species within the revised swap. As we all know, there are a lot of species that are key to informing conservation actions in the state that don't really fall neatly into either of those previous categories. So one of these examples is beaver and beaver modified habitat. While we determined through our analysis that American beaver do not meet the definition of an SGCN in Oregon, we do recognize it's really important to highlight their role in conservation within the swap, both in KCIs as well as pertinent habitats like wetlands, flowing water and riparian areas, and aspen woodlands. Next slide, please. So we received a ton of valuable partner and public feedback during the first review process between January and April. Including new species to assess against our criteria, new data to inform final decisions, and questions about how the process went. I think looking at the participant list today, we've got several of you folks who provided that high quality information that really helped spark questions, conversations, and helped us dig in further. So thank you for that. And if you've been tracking the process really closely, you'll see that there's several changes resulting from that in our draft list of SGCN. So there's some species that came back onto the SGCN list, like the chipping sparrow in the Willamette Valley, due to partner feedback. Many invertebrate species were added to the SGIN list following expert guidance in this interim. And we also addressed errors in the early draft and updated information on taxonomy for a number of species that were a little bit questionable, and we learned more during that time period. So at the end of the day, we ended up with 321 unique species of amphibians, birds, reptiles, mammals, fish, invertebrates, plants, and algae included as SGCN. There are several species for which multiple species management units or distinct population segments are identified as well. So sometimes if you're looking at the numbers, it might not add up perfectly, and it's because you might be looking at two subspecies of the same species. We also expanded our SGIN list and provided information on other species throughout the document. Next slide, please. The next focal area is the key habitats identified within the SWAP. So these are our native habitats of conservation concern that are essential to many of our SGCN within the state. Information contained within the key habitat profiles on limiting factors and recommended approaches can support land managers or landowners at all scales to help prioritize conservation or restoration of these habitats in their area. As an example of how this information can connect with more locally specific planning, the Willamette Valley Oak and Prairie Cooperative developed a strategic action plan in the last handful of years that leveraged the information provided in the previous version of the SWAP on habitats as one of 3 high-level resources to guide that planning process. This strategic action plan references limiting factors from the SWAP and provides more high-resolution information on conservation needs and opportunities to benefit Oak and Prairie in the Willamette Valley. I think this is a really great example of how the SWAP can look at that really big picture, and then the more local partners can help us zero in and provide that local lens. These key habitat profiles can also be really relevant to individual landowners who are looking for broad information on what they can do to conserve needed habitat in their own area. In our approach to revising the key habitats for the SWAP, there were 3 main focuses. So there's a reanalysis of a habitat change, revision of threats and conservation actions, and mapping the extent of key habitats statewide. During our technical and public review process earlier this year, we received really helpful feedback and new information from the last 10 years to enhance those habitat profiles. Habitat types included as key habitats weren't changed from 2016. This was because the categories were seen as broad and inclusive. And for this revision, we're also updating our key habitat map that will be integrated into the Compass platform to increase accuracy in the extent and distribution of key habitats by incorporating new data and ground truthing existing vegetation types. This will help our partners who are looking to use the tools from the SWAP to inform conservation actions to make sure that they have more accurate information at their fingertips. Next one, please. So our next focal area is our key conservation issues, or our KCIs. As we think about the biodiversity crisis in Oregon and globally, these KCIs are those major mechanisms driving that change. They're impacting broad suites of species and habitats. These large-scale conservation issues or threats that affect or potentially affect many species and habitats over these large landscapes throughout the state. So these are things like climate change, barriers to animal movement, invasive species, water quality and quantity, and others. And so, what can you do when you look at this, these big picture global issues, global threats? As an individual, whether it's contributing to reducing light pollution by turning out lights, submitting information to the iNaturalist Roadkills Project to help inform our understanding of how to address barriers to animal movement, or volunteering with a local group to remove invasive species. For many Oregonians, KCIs really are the lens through which we all can engage. Each KCI profile provides a broad overview of the statewide threat and information on recommended actions to serve as a starting point for agencies and organizations to build their own plan over the next decade. The text also can help individuals and land managers who need ideas or a rationale to guide their conservation actions. Some of the highlights in this revision for our KCIs are, again, the addition of pollution as a KCI, and a complete overhaul of the climate change KCI with the support of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. During the technical and public review process, new information was provided and feedback shared on how to revise KCI profile content to be clearer and more comprehensive. So next, I want to talk a little bit about our conservation opportunity areas, or our COAs. These are built to help practitioners focus their conservation efforts and financial investments in specific areas across the state to increase the likelihood of long-term success over larger landscapes. They're intended to guide voluntary conservation actions in Oregon, and they're not regulatory. For the revision, we performed an extensive cost-benefit analysis with more than 250 data layers to delineate the draft boundaries. Information taken into consideration in drafting these revised boundaries included both beneficial factors like presence of SGCNs and key habitats, and detrimental factors like presence of pollutants or impervious surfaces. We also worked in this revision to make COAs consistent in how they treat land designations like designated wilderness. I'm getting some feedback from someone. So through July 31, we're looking for additional information for final refinements, primarily due to local knowledge of projects or threats that aren't adequately represented. So our data sets aren't perfect, and feedback can really help make sure that the final product reflects shared concerns. We're particularly interested in information on long-term ongoing projects, large patches of key or specialized habitats, and other features of conservation concern. A web map is currently available with an associated survey link on the SWAP revision webpage that Carolyn will share at the end of the presentation. This shows the 2025 COA boundaries as compared to the 2016 COA boundaries and can help you provide us that feedback. Next slide, please. So the final focal area I want to touch on is the conservation toolbox. So even if you're familiar with the Oregon Conservation Strategy, the Conservation Toolbox will look brand new to you. In this revision, we identified as a priority the need to empower more Oregonians to be able to take voluntary conservation actions. We, as a state wildlife agency, cannot do it alone. We, as a state wildlife agency, and all of our conservation practitioner partners can't do it alone either. And so we want to provide those tools and resources to help people develop sufficient capabilities, so the knowledge and skills, as well as motivation to be able to take advantage of existing opportunities to act, as well as better help connect folks in all of Oregon's communities to the conservation needs and opportunities that exist in both their areas and the areas that they spend time in. When you look at the SWAP, especially in its current form before it becomes web-enabled, it's a lot. It's 520 pages right now, and there aren't a lot of pictures at this point. And so for the average Oregonian who's not already actively engaged in conservation, it can be really hard to take a look at that and identify your role. So what can you do to help keep Oregon's natural spaces secure? This toolbox works to bridge that gap, providing example information on specific actions that individuals can take at the household, neighborhood, or watershed scales. And those tie back to the species, habitats, and threats that we've already discussed. The toolbox is built in a way to provide us some flexibility over time to keep it up to date and responsive to public and partner feedback on new opportunities, new stories to showcase around the state, or to address blind spots as we learn better how to engage with more audiences. We're learning and we want to learn more. There's a section on goals and actions for agencies like ours to engage all Oregonians. We recognize the importance of broadening the tent, and we're working to address those gaps. Making information and resources available is really critical for us in order to achieve that. There's also a resource section built to support individuals who are trying to get started with conservation actions, like restoring habitat on their land or in their community. During the revision of the toolbox, we worked directly one-on-one with partners across the state to learn from their experience and find where we could showcase their story as a means to show and not tell how Oregonians can take action to support wildlife. I'm going to kick this back to Carolyn to wrap it up, and then we'll go to questions after Carolyn.
Thanks, Emily. So we wanted to end today by providing some examples of the types of feedback that would be helpful and instructions on how to provide that feedback. So we have done our best, but there are probably still mistakes in the draft content. Please let us know if you come across any errors. Please also let us know if there is any information that is missing, something that you looked for but couldn't find, or some basic information that you think would be helpful to understand the issue better. We also want to know if there are additional conservation actions that would help with implementation, or an action that you are currently engaged in, but that's not listed here. And also, please point out any resources that would help in implementation that are not currently in the SWAP, something you would find helpful to have available, or a partnership that you would like highlighted. And for COAs, as Emily mentioned, if you are interested in our COAs, please provide a review using the web map and online survey. Please use this online feedback form that's available on the SWAP revision website. references to line numbers and section names would be very helpful for us to be able to incorporate your feedback by pointing us to the right place in the document that you are talking about. Our comments are open for the next 2 weeks, and we must receive your feedback by July 31st for it to be considered before commission review and approval. However, if you're unavailable to provide your comments by the end of July, additional public comment will be taken through the regular commission process. And the next step that you can take, again, is to review the sections of the plan that are of interest to you or that you have expertise in, or just something that you might want to learn about. And then if you have feedback, please provide that to us using the comment form or the revision email. As Emily mentioned, COAs do have a specific survey available, and you can find that through the COA document available on the revision website. Again, we are asking for comments to ODFW by the end of July. We will then submit the final draft to ODFW's commission for review and approval at the August commission meeting. Here is a reminder of our revision email address, and you can also feel free to send us emails if you have additional questions or have more comments to share. And the revision website address is here as well. And again, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it back over to Beth.
All right, thanks everyone. We're going to start the Q&A section now. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. In the meantime, we've got a few questions to start us off. So the first one is going to be for Jessica, and I'll ask each presenter or person who's answering the question to reintroduce themselves. So this one is for Jessica. Why did you integrate marine and nearshore threats? Did the nearshore strategy go away?
Thanks so much, Beth, and for everyone, Jessica Watson with the Marine Resource Program. And as Emily mentioned in her presentation, the swap's really meant to be inclusive of all of Oregon's species and habitats, both marine and terrestrial, to guide the conservation work. And therefore, we took the marine and nearshore threats and integrated them into those key conservation issues. So there are many issues for the conservation of nearshore and marine habitats and the species that live there. And those KCIs affecting those nearshore and marine habitats include things like the KCIs for climate change, disruption and disturbance regimes, land use changes, which in the marine environment is often referred to as marine spatial planning, invasive species, pollution, and water quality specifically. And really, the intention here is to help facilitate voluntary and collaborative actions to improve understanding and stewardship of Oregon's nearshore resources. So we wanted to make sure to include that marine and terrestrial lens together in kind of our attempt to really integrate what was previously the nearshore strategy and the conservation strategy. So when it comes to did the nearshore strategy go away? No, it's just in different pieces and in different places. So the main places where most of the information is either located or linked to would be the nearshore ecoregion or the nearshore key habitats section. And from those two locations, you can get to a lot of the same sections you'd be familiar with if you were referencing in our nearshore strategy. And I'm happy to go into more detail if anyone has more questions on that.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. We have another question. This one's about fish, so we'll kick this one to Michelle. Can you tell us about some notable updates for fish species in the swap?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Again, I'm Michelle Weaver, and I was coordinating the inland fish species within Fish Division at ODFW, and those inland fish species also included the freshwater invertebrates that are classified as shellfish as well. So during this revision, we really attempted to incorporate fish a little bit more throughout the whole swap. We've included updated fish passage information. We've included some fish perspectives within the different KCIs and more just kind of examples using fish throughout the swap. We did, like Emily mentioned, review all of our inland fish and shellfish species against the criteria that was developed to see where everything stood against the species that are most at greatest risk or in conservation need. And so A good thing, 10 years ago, there was a couple of species that were a greatest information need that we now know enough about where we're able to make the determination that they are indeed a species at greatest risk. So some examples of that are the Klamath River lamprey, Tahoe sucker, our northern roach, and the Montane pea clam were previously a species that we didn't know enough about to make a determination, but in the last 10 years, we know a little bit more. A couple other species that were evaluated made it to the species of greatest conservation need for this round. Some examples of that would be our Pacific brook lamprey, Klamath large-scale sucker, the upper Snake River sockeye, and steelhead or rainbow trout, and then our freshwater mussel species. A couple more of them were added as a species of greatest conservation this round. Also, some of the species down in the Klamath are now a species of greatest conservation need, the Klamath Chinook. And then lastly, there's always some taxonomic updates and genetic work that gets done. So there's a newly identified crayfish species that's now a species of greatest conservation need. And some of our lamprey have had an update to their scientific names and classification, and our Western River lamprey and Western Brook lamprey are now considered one species that has two different life history variants. So some of that recent genetic and taxonomic work has been included as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Michelle, for answering that one. Next, we've got a question about the website update. So I think I'll kick this one to Carolyn. Will this be web-enabled like the Oregon Conservation Strategy? And when can we anticipate new information going live?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So hopefully those of you who are here are aware, but some of you may not be. The Oregon Conservation Strategy, the version that we have online right now, was the only fully web-enabled SWAP in the last round of revisions that was completed in 2016. And because of this, the Oregon Conservation Strategy was really held up as that gold standard of what a SWAP could achieve. And because the OCS, Oregon Conservation Strategy, was web-enabled, we were really able to increase our reach and allow a much broader audience to interact with the information that we had available there. And we average well over 100,000 unique users every year to that website. So it really is a well-functioning, unparalleled example of how a SWAP can work online. And it is something that is a priority for us to make sure that we continue that legacy. So this, in our revision, our goal is definitely to continue with a fully web-enabled SWAP. We are currently working with our director's office on some new guidance to figure out how we can update the current website, but also meet our agency's plan to sort of revamp the agency's websites as a whole and eventually absorb the SWAP website into our agency's website. So we are trying to strike that balance between meeting our federal requirements and having that information available, allowing that increased accessibility that being online allows us, but also meeting the desire to bring the SWAP into ODFW's own pages. So our plan is to update the current Oregon Conservation Strategy website with the revised information once it is approved by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which we anticipate happening in the spring of 2026. We're broadly looking at probably March of 2026, at which time the updated information will roll out on the current website. And then at some point in the future, maybe in 2027, we're still kind of figuring out the timelines there. It will get absorbed into the ODFW website and move into new pages.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer, Carolyn. Now I see we've got some questions in the chat. We'll start off with this question from Leanne. Are you going to demo the COA web map? I'll kick that one to Emily.
Thanks, Leanne. So that's both an exceptional question and a suggestion, and we didn't think about it, but that's something we should probably see if we can pull together pretty fast. It's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to drop the link for the, I already dropped the link for the into the chat. So it should be pretty self-explanatory. It's got an embedded web map that you can click through. But what I'd like to do, taking that suggestion, is I'll go back to Esther Collier, who's our GIS guru for this effort, and see if it might be feasible. And so it might be something where it's just a quick 5-minute video that we upload to our YouTube page. But if that's something that would be really supportive, I think that's absolutely something we should give a shot. Does that help answer that question for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. We will move on to the next question in the chat. Bob Bailey asked about sea otters. How will individual suggestions for conservation actions be handled? Several proposals for conservation actions that were proposed for sea otters were not included. How will these be addressed? They were added as a species of greatest conservation need, but there's no conservation action to return them to Oregon. What's the threshold for including a conservation action?
I could take a stab at the first part of that, but I think Jessica or Justin would be the right person for the final answer. So to start that off, we did our best to take comments that we received throughout and bring them to the species-specific experts that we had in-house and work with other folks to get a better understanding of both species identification as an SGCN as well as some of the details in there. And so I think threshold is a challenging word. It's not like it comes to this point and then we say, yes, we will add it, or this number of requests and we'll add it. It's more judgment based as we're trying to direct the way that we provide information on these species of greatest conservation need. But specific to the sea otter, I don't know the answer to that. So Jessica or Justin, who wants to answer?
Well, I can add that, yeah, so we did add sea otters as a species of greatest conservation need, and there are some data gaps in distribution. And so we definitely consulted with our subject matter experts, but I wasn't a part of those discussions. I'm not sure if Justin is, and if not, I can always get that information and bring that back to what they were using when making that determination of what to include in those actions.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I can't recall exactly what the proposals that you put in there, Bob, for those, and or whether the actions weren't included there. But I think in terms of what input would be put in, we've addressed that with we'll evaluate that based on subject matter experts. If this issue with sea otter reintroduction, there's the current swap is not where we're seeing as a place that we can change our current approach to the lack of sea otters in Oregon. So it's still something we're evaluating and supporting the science and learning more. But through the swap, it's this is not where we're planning to change how Oregon as a state is addressing the reintroduction of sea otters.
Okay, we'll go to Brian now. I see you've got your hand up, Brian.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. For some reason, I can't get my camera to work, so sorry about that. Yeah, sorry, my question just was a little too complicated to try to type out in the chat, so hopefully I can just ask it this way. So first of all, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And I really appreciate the point Bernadette made about this plan being for all species of wildlife, not just and fish too. I take it, not just the ones that are hunted and fished. That's great to have that plan. I need to admit I've only been through the overview section of the draft so far. But a question that occurred to me was just that there's a real emphasis made on the idea that the plan is very informational in terms of describing what the conditions are out there in terms of species and habitats and so forth. But as far as like actual actions, it's called an action plan. So I'm interested in, what the actual actions are. It sounds like those are mostly suggestions for other individuals and groups to take on. And I get this isn't a regulatory document that, you can't be enacting new rules with the plan, that sort of thing. But it seemed to me that there would be some specific actions that the plan could prescribe for ODFW within its existing regulatory authority, such as emphasizing, just to toss out a couple of examples, how it might enforce the anti-poaching laws or the laws against taking species out of the wild, for holding in captivity, or just, those are just like rough things it seems like ODFW could do, or direction about how it handles interagency comments on permitting proposals or that kind of thing. And so I'm just curious, was that sort of and I guess the concept is specific action items for ODFW. Were those kinds of concepts explored? Is that something that would be precluded by the Fish and Wildlife guidelines? I'm just kind of, I guess, ultimately curious about why there isn't more specific directives or specific actions by ODFW in the plan. Sorry, that was a long-winded question. But.
Can I reiterate what I think your question is and see if I'm on target?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing from you is a question about specific guidance about actions you can take to benefit species of greatest conservation need, and wanting to see those in the plan. Is that accurate?
Well, it sounds like those are in the plan, but they're more in terms of what other people can do to implement the plan. And what I'm wondering is, it doesn't sound like there's much in there. Again, I've just been through the overview, but it doesn't sound like there's much in there in terms of what ODFW is going to do to conserve these species and habitats. My question is really, if I'm correct about that, why is that the case? Was that explored? And there's some discussion in the overview about the Fish and Wildlife Service guidelines probably provide some limitations on what you can do with one of these plans. But yeah, my question is more why there aren't more specific action items for ODFW in particular in the plan.
Okay, I think I hear you. So in a lot of ways, this is an action plan that ODFW will implement. Like this, that guides a lot of the work that our program, so the Wildlife Diversity Program, does, a lot of the work that others folks do, but it uses a tone that's not just saying ODFW will do this, because if ODFW does this, that's not quite enough. And so we recognize that we're speaking to an audience that includes ODFW, but that it's not just ODFW. Does that help? And Bernadette, this might be one where I look to you as well.
Yeah, that might just be a better way to look at it. So yeah, so thanks for that. But yeah, interested in what Bernadette might add.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point that we're not calling ourselves out and saying we're going to do these three and the rest are for everyone else or anything like that. But I think what's important to know is that we do see this as a way to prioritize our work. So using Emily's example of the Wildlife Diversity Program, they're really going to focus on those species of greatest conservation need, and then even pare down to the top 5 species per ecoregion when we're kind of prioritizing with limited resources. And across the agency, the key habitats, or previously the strategy habitats and the conservation opportunity areas, that's where we really try to focus our habitat restoration work and the areas that we're doing that work. So I think we as ODFW do use the tools that are available to guide our own work, even though it's not specifically called out as actions for ourselves. But that's definitely a priority for us in the department to use this tool like we would ask others to.
Oh, okay, thanks very much for those answers.
Okay, we've got another question from Eva. I'm reviewing the Conservation Opportunity Areas web map called Compass. The territorial sea is included visually on the map, but so far nearshore habitats are not included as a type of conservation opportunity area. Is this something that could be considered in the future? There is a lot of work in marine conservation, and it would be interesting to include more marine analysis.
I'll start us off and then kick to Justin and Jessica. I wish that I had pulled out my canned response for this, because I've thought about it a lot, and it's been a pretty hefty discussion internally. But what it comes down to is really So like as we circle land, we explicitly cut out Gap 1 lands because those are going to be the areas that are already protected. So those are areas where biodiversity is protected and they're not going to suppress natural events. And so we explicitly removed them from those conservation opportunity areas. And then when you look along the coast, so you look at all of those sea stacks, that's going to pretty much just remove them. And so that's why we didn't have marine conservation opportunity areas included. There are other spatial tools that I'm going to now kick to Jessica or Justin to provide that detail.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, there's different ways to classify marine and nearshore habitats, and in both the nearshore ecoregion section and the nearshore habitat sections, we go in and link to specifically how we classify those habitats and what methodology is typically used for the classification of those habitat types. But to the point of whether, those being included in the mapping right now, that's something that we could consider for the future. But there are other mapping tools that are available that include some of those classification schemes where you would be able to see how it breaks out across the nearshore habitat types. That's included in our resources section. So I think like in the future, there's the potential to Emily's point of how to think about nearshore and marine habitats under that same similar lens as our terrestrial landscapes.
Okay, hopefully that answered your question, Eva. Perfect. Okay. All right, next we've got a question from Kevin Martin about Bighorn. If we send information to the revision email address, will that be included or do we need to use the comment form? We were happy to see that Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep was included as an SGCN, but have been confused as to why California Bighorn sheep were not. They have the same issues and risks. Checking with our neighboring states of Idaho and Washington, they have included both. So we resent some information related to California Bighorn sheep on Monday, July 14th. Do we need to resend this information following this call? Will we get feedback on how our information is or is not utilized and why?
I think that's a me question. So I'm going to try to address it piece by piece, or maybe piece and then piece. So Kevin, yes, if you send information to the revision email, Carolyn gets it and then she disseminates it. And so when you shared, I think it was maybe in March or maybe earlier, some of the earlier correspondences, Carolyn first sent it to Anne Mary Myers and Martin Nugent in Wildlife Division, and they sent that further to our subject matter experts. And so that's one that I think is a really great example of how external comment really sparked a lot of discussion and thought. And so I really appreciate you providing that level of feedback. So with Rocky Mountain Bighorn sheep, that's a really great question. So this is one that we really grappled with internally. So in addition to you, there were some questions about why Rocky Mountain, why not California Bighorn? And again, comments like yours were really helpful in informing that process. So we sent this to Don, our expert on staff, to help us think through that question. Within our crew, we have a lot less familiarity with some of those species. And initially, when we thought about bighorn sheep, there was a recommendation to remove them from the list. But the end decision, as you saw, was to leave Rocky Mountain. Don, of course, would be the best resource for the specific answers. And so if you're interested in talking through that with him, the key difference that I understood flagged from him between those two is that the Rocky Mountain subspecies is much more limited in suitable, available, viable habitats compared to California bighorn. They are both susceptible to disease events, though the California subspecies is less limited by those available habitats. So we didn't really have capacity to conduct one-on-one interviews with everyone who submitted comments, and I really wish we could, because it's been enormously valuable to do that. But again, the feedback that you guys submitted was incredibly helpful, sparked questions, helped us think through the process. And so just using that as an example of, yes, please submit that kind of comments. It's helpful for us to try to think critically about the decision-making process and come to a final decision. No, you do not need to resend your information. We've been looking at it.
All right, thank you for answering that one, Emily. We've got a three-part question from Bob in the chat. One, will a revised swap draft be produced? Two, will the commission entertain public testimony when approving the swap in August? And three, what is the drop dead date for submitting the swap to the Fish and Wildlife Service?
I can answer that one. So yes, we are asking for you to submit your comments to ODFW by July 31st. Any comments that we receive before then will be considered for a final draft to be produced that will be submitted to the commission. The drop dead date for submitting the swap to the service is October 1st of this year. And your question of will the commission entertain public testimony when approving the swap in August? I don't want to know, or don't want to say for sure. Maybe Bernadette, you know better if they will be accepting public testimony.
Yes. So the way we have the kind of public comment period structured is, as Carolyn described, if you can get comments to us by July 31st, we can try to incorporate things as appropriate into the draft that goes to the commission the following week. So that's pretty quick turnaround, but we're going to do our best to address those. And then the commission will have its usual public comment process. So once those documents get posted for the commission on the commission website, that opens the commission's public comment process, and anyone can submit comments to the commission or sign up to testify at the commission meeting under this agenda topic.
All right, great. I think we've covered all of the questions that have come through in the chat and the Q&A. So give it another minute to see if folks have any additional questions. But as a reminder, I've put in the chat the link to the swap revision website, and there are additional links there, lots of resources. There's a link for being able to email the swap team, as well as that comment form that we've been talking about today.